wind-blown tall grass of the Great Plains roll like an ocean, vast with muted features. The native peoples unerringly navigated this wilderness hunting the buffalo. Where natural landmarks were indistinct, the native huntsman would pile flat stones, 2 or 3 feet high, on hills or mounds to mark the way. Friendly tribesmen arranged stones, feathers, and other items uniquely identifiable to indicate their direction of travel, the path of the buffalo, or even the announcement of the birth of a child. Across the vast distances, these signal stones, these trail markers, were indispensable. Reliance on the trail markers waned as the 20th century and the white man's civilization surrounded the Native American way of life. Towns, ranches, and roads replaced natural stone, and the signal stones were scavenged for claim markers and other building materials. Historians in the 1920s rediscovered a native trail marker near present-day Marlin, Oklahoma, on land shared by the Ponca Nation and the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch. Joseph B. Thoburn of the Oklahoma Historical Society engaged the Millers to restore the marker. In 1927, the Millers took it a step further and erected a memorial to White Eagle, Ponca chief, and their friend. Later, Monument Hill also became the burial ground of the black cowboy and the inventor of bulldogging, Bill Pickett, 8 other 101 Ranch cowhands, and their relatives. The 101 Ranch old-timers have taken historical responsibility to once again preserve this historic landmark after years of neglect.
Most people know Indian reservations of the 19th century were located in modern-day Oklahoma. Before the land run of 1893, cattle ranchers leased land from the Cherokee and the aptly named Cherokee Outlet. In preparation for the run, cattlemen were required to vacate the land and suspend their leases. The United States government purchased the outlet lands from the Cherokee and on September 16, 1893, opened it to white settlement. G.W. Miller was one of these cattlemen. He and his 3 sons, Joe C., George L., and Zach Miller, were destined for fame. They would create the world-famous 101 Ranch Wild West show. The 101 Ranch was not just known for the Wild West show that brought it world fame, but it was at one time the largest diversified farm and ranch in the world. The ranch was nearly self-contained and self-sufficient, providing employment for thousands. The Millers pioneered work in hybrid cattle, wheat, corn, fruit, and nut trees. Many of their techniques are used today. The beginnings of the ranch were intimately involved with the Ponca Indians, especially their ancestral Chief White Eagle. Chief White Eagle led the Ponca from Nebraska to Indian Territory in 1877 along their own Trail of Tears. The father of the famous Miller brothers, G.W. Miller, may have been instrumental in getting the Ponca settled near Ponca City after they languished a year without proper shelter or clothing in Baxter Springs, Kansas. Later, a small number of the Ponca returned to Nebraska with Chief Standing Bear. Chief White Eagle chose to stay and support those who remained. Many of the Ponca, as well as Oto, Osage, Pawnee, and other Indian tribesmen, worked at the 101 Ranch and were Wild West show performers. A strong mutual relationship was formed. It is probably for this reason that when the Oklahoma Historical Society discovered an ancient native trail marker in 1927, the Millers were approached and asked to restore it. The ranch at its peak covered some 110,000 acres, much of it leased Ponca reservation land. The marker in question was on such a parcel of land. Ever the showman, George L. Miller no doubt saw the request as an opportunity to honor Chief White Eagle, who died in 1914, and to draw attention to the ranch and the Wild West show. The original trail marker may have been a 2 or 3 foot high pile of stones. George's version was a 14-foot high, 5-foot diameter cairn or pillar topped with a whitewashed concrete eagle and a handmade stone plaque commemorating the dedication. Surviving members of Chief White Eagle's family, including his granddaughter, Elaine Waters, along with prominent people from the ranch and surrounding area, attended the dedication in June of 1927. The monument stands on Spindletop Hill, also called Signal Hill, a mound just north of Bliss, Oklahoma. To curry favor with the oil baron E.W. Marlin, Bliss was later renamed Marlin. The notion that Chief White Eagle is buried here is an urban legend. Even so, many still venerate the spot, adding to the real legend of the Ponca chief. From the day of the dedication forward, the mound would forever be known as Monument Hill. No one could miss the figure of the monument while driving between Marlin and Ponca City on State Highway 156. Even the trains that pass on the east have an unobstructed view of this sacred historical site. The 101 Ranch produced another legend, William M. Pickett. Bill Pickett, as he is better known, was the real cowboy who invented bulldogging. As a boy, Bill Pickett watched the cowboys in Texas. He noticed that the dogs that worked with the cowboys could take down a 2,000-pound steer by clamping onto the animal's lower lip. Bill Pickett figured out how a man could do this, creating a spectacular act well suited for a Wild West show. He also mastered all other aspects of cowboying. To everyone on the 101 Ranch, and indeed the world, he was a cowboy's cowboy. He worked on the 101 Ranch from 1905 until his untimely death on April 2, 1932. He reportedly died doing what he did best, working from a horse. He died 2 weeks after a fatal blow to the head. Michael Wallace, in his book, The Real Wild West, quoted Bill Pickett as saying long before his death and the dedication of Monument Hill that he wanted to be buried in the hard ground among friends. He was referring to the place he called Signal Hill. Monument Hill is a burial site and should be considered sacred ground. The 101 Ranch Old Timers Association would like to honor the memories of Chief White Eagle, Bill Pickett, and the others by preparing the area for respectful viewing by the public. It was something that's so lucky, I think it was supposed to happen. One of the many urban legends of Monument Hill is one about Bill Pickett and his horse. The story goes that the horse is buried in the vicinity. Another is that a number of ranch hands were also buried on the mound. Because Bill Pickett's grave is the only one with a marker, no one could be sure that any others were there at all. Such historical accounts as there were indicated 7 individuals. The Old Timers Association needed proof. If true, they were very possibly placed there before the famous Bill Pickett. So when he referred to being buried in the hard ground among friends, Bill may have been speaking of the others already interned. In March of 2004, the 101 Ranch Old Timers hosted a wine tasting to help raise funds for the Monument Hill project. People from the area and beyond came to lend support to the effort. One of those attending was Guy Monroe, the chairman of the Kaw tribe. After hearing of the possibility that others might be buried on the hill, Chairman Monroe spontaneously offered the use of his tribe's ground-penetrating radar and the expertise of a forensic anthropologist. This was a significant barrier that needed to be overcome to continue with the project. It was beyond good fortune that Chairman Monroe should just show up and make such a generous offer. So it was that we came in contact with Crystal Douglas, a forensic anthropologist with 25 years experience.
Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Douglas. I am an anthropologist. I have specialties in archaeology and specialties in forensics. My specialty, however, deals mostly with human remains. And as he was saying, he was talking about the shows that you all watch on television. I do not work with flesh. My bodies have none, so I prefer it that way. I only deal in remains that are 200 years old or older.
Crystal asked that the area be prepared for examination. Gene Evans, president of the 101 Ranch Old Timers and owner of the land surrounding the Monument Hill site, had the mound's tall grass mowed to ground level. On August 13, 2004, a contingent of the 101 Ranch Old Timers and other interested folks gathered at Monument Hill to observe and help. Crystal first did a visual survey of the hill, taking notice of small mounds and depressions, and with small blue flags roughly mapped the areas she wanted to explore. With her son's help, she made initial runs north and south over the area with the radar, placing red flags at significant points. Once determining points of interest, she crossed over the same areas east and west. In this way, the corner points of the graves were located, which were then outlined in red paint. 8 grave sites other than Bill Pickett's were found. One of them was very different. This grave did not seem to have any corners. In fact, it seemed to be larger and round. It also stands apart from the 7 and closer to Bill's grave than the others. After comparing notes, the old-timer historians agreed this had to be the horse. But which horse? Over the course of a decades-long career, Bill Pickett would have had a number of favorite horses. Now that we have the location of the graves, the project can move forward with your help. It was something that's so lucky. I think it was supposed to happen. Plans for making Monument Hill ready for the public have been in the works since the 1970s, but due to organizational difficulties, they were put on hold. This may have been a blessing in disguise. Since then, ground-penetrating radar has become easier to use and more accessible. GPS equipment has become pocket-sized, so a map of the area and a permanent record of the exact position of the graves can be preserved. And electronics will make it possible to better secure the site from vandals. Although the historical records indicated that only non-Native Americans are buried on Monument Hill, NAGPRA's interest in Indian Territory gravesites has involved diverse groups in such a project. The only thing the 101 Ranch Old Timers need now is support. An example, volunteers and contributions. They are now working with the architects to compose a concept plan suitable for presentation to grant providers. And they are working hard to gather the funds for civil engineers, contractors, utility providers, and environmental experts. What's next? All of the above. You have helped with funding by purchasing this video. And if you tell others about the Monument Hill project, you become a volunteer. We would also like to protect the monument from vandals and souvenir hunters. By purchasing this video, you have contributed to the preservation of a national historic treasure. Monument Hill represents something else too. From the 1880s to the ranch's final days in 1936, the era of the 101 Ranch was a time of transition from the real Wild West to what we enjoy today. The plight of the North American Indians and the transition from horse to horsepower should not be forgotten. It is, after all, our history. We cannot let the historical contribution of Bill Pickett, Chief White Eagle, and the hard-working ranch hands of the 101 go unnoticed. We have a plan and a goal. With your help, all America will have access to Monument Hill and a taste of the times and people who built this country.
Joanne said, I think you're going to enjoy this. I hope so. I've been a big fan of the 101 Ranch for many, many years, and we're going to do this a little bit different than what we usually do. I'm going to introduce Mr. Al Ritter. In addition to his duties as a state law enforcement officer and his outside work as a researcher and author, he spent 23 years as the editor of the Oklahoma State Trooper magazine, the official publication of the Oklahoma State Troopers Association, and a principal fundraising entity of that organization. He and his wife Dolores have resided in Ponca City since 1973. He's well acquainted with the operation of nonprofit fraternal organizations and continues his long-time interest in American Western history while serving as a member of the 101 Ranch Old Timers Board of Directors. Currently, he is involved in fundraising, research, and grant submissions for the organization's Monument Hill Bill Pickett project. So, help me make welcome Mr. Ritter.
It's certainly my pleasure to be here and speak briefly before you. Our principal speaker, Mr. John Cooper, will make the major address. I think it's appropriate in response to you folks' invitation to appear here work behind the scenes and make a great museum like this one what it is and will remain to be. So thank you again. I'd like to introduce my friend, Mr. John D. Cooper Sr. And in doing that, I'll tell you something about him and his background, and one of the reasons of many that we consider him very unique. Mr. Cooper spent 33 years with the Federal Soil Conservation Service and retired from federal service in 1982. He and his late wife, Mary Lou, made their home near Stroud, Oklahoma, and have since 1958. They were the parents, and are the parents of 3 sons and a daughter. Their second son is named after John's childhood friend, Zachary Taylor Miller, Jr., the son of Colonel Zach Miller that you saw on the screen along with his 2 brothers, Zach Jr.'s uncles. Mr. Cooper's interest in collecting items relating to the 101 Ranch began in 1937. This took place when he first saw a newspaper clipping on the subject of Zach Miller Sr.'s legal attempt to regain control of the fabulous empire, the 101 Ranch. John knew Colonel Miller Sr., and to this day, as he's related to me, retains a vivid memory of meeting Colonel Miller, and that he first did in 1933. Now, the process that brought this connection between Mr. Miller and the 101 Ranch and the 3 colonels and their nephew, Junior, was the fact that John's uncle was the first federal Indian agent for the Ponca, Oto, and Pawnee tribes of northern Oklahoma. I misspoke. He wasn't the first. Okay? Those 3 northern Oklahoma tribes saw John's uncle come into play in 1919 as their Indian agent. So as a youth, John spent summers with his uncle and became acquainted with Zach Miller Jr. and his mother when they had residence in the 101 Ranch store building, which was during the 1940s. Mr. Cooper's vast collection of printed items related to the history of the 101 Ranch was an important part of the nationally recognized author Michael Wallace's research for his very successful book, The Real Wild West, The 101 Ranch and the Creation of the American West, which was published by St. Martin's Press of New York in 1999. Incidentally, that entertaining volume is recommended reading for anyone interested in learning more about the history of the fabulous empire that was the 101 Ranch, and it's available on both hardback and softback. We greatly recommend it. Mr. Cooper remains an avid reader and collects books. It's probably not a surprise on the subject of American history and American circus history, which is also an interest of his. Now, he remains involved in raising cattle and farming, and he has interest in both activities near Stroud and in western Oklahoma. He's a former president of the 101 Ranch Collectors Association. His interest now includes serving as a board member for the 101 Ranch Old Timers Association. In addition to that function, he also currently serves as the editor of our quarterly newsletter, and we have some of those down here for you. The most recent issue, along with an organizational history of our group and membership forms for those of you that are interested and haven't already picked them up. They're available here in front of the stage. But John's had a long time interest in seeing the Ponca tribe Chief White Eagle Monument and Bill Pickett's grave made accessible to visitors. That's on a hilltop, as you might have seen in our little film presentation, just north of Marvin in Noble County. Now, that site is owned by our organization, as is the acreage where the headquarters of the 101 Ranch once existed. We now operate that as a roadside park. We own that property too. And the Monument Hill Bill Pickett gravesite is found on the east side of Oklahoma State Highway 156, which has been designated as the 101 Ranch Memorial Highway by the Oklahoma Department Most of our members feels that the project of opening Monument Hill and Bill Pickett's gravesite to the public would be instrumental, would be a very instrumental move in helping preserve the history of the 101 Ranch and the memory of the cowboys and cowgirls that worked there, which is essentially the focus of our operation. I'd like to introduce Mr. Cooper to you now.
Good morning.
Good morning.
After hearing that introduction, I thought they had replaced me on the program. But whenever I talk about the 101 Ranch, it is the joy to my heart. I have been interested in the ranch all of my life, and suppose I always will be. And when I started to make one of these talks, there were so many things happened up there. You don't know what to tell about and what not. But I will assure you one thing, that I won't keep you here too long. A few years ago, I was asked to go to Tulsa and make a talk to a grade school class. And the teacher said about Bill Pickett. And the teacher said, well, you can stay about 30 minutes. And I said, well, I don't know whether I can keep the attention of these small children for 30 minutes or not. But I said, I'll try. So I started. And pretty soon the teacher tapped me on the shoulder. And I said, what? She said, we're going to have to stop this. And I said, why? Is my 30 minutes up already? She said, no, your hour and a half is up already. And these kids are going to miss their lunch if we don't turn it loose. But I'll assure you, I've got my watch this morning, so I won't make that long. I have given several of these talks, and there has been hundreds of newspaper and magazine articles and books written about the ranch, but they're all mostly on a certain part of the ranch. And it would be impossible this morning to go cover the entire ranch. And I thought I would do something that it may interest you and it may not. But the ranch headquarters was a wonderful place. You saw the picture of the White House. That was the center of all the activities. And everything started from the White House. And in fact, the headquarters was really a small camp. And I thought if you would bear with me, we would take a short walk around the headquarters. And we will start from the White House. And right next to the White House was the poultry department, which you will find as many as 25,000 laying hens in production at one time. Right next to the poultry department was the seed corn barn. Back before the days of hybrid corn like we have it today, the millers developed their own strain of corn, and their seed was in very much demand. And they would sell from 40 to 50,000 bushels of seed corn a year. Right next to the seed corn barn was a large mule barn that would hold 300 head of work mules. And it must have been quite a show of a morning when all of those mules were being brought out and sent to the fields to work. Right next to the mule barn, just as we go down the street south, was the round barn. It had a full-size circus ring and was used in the wintertime to train various animals to perform at the Wild West show. In fact, the elephants were worked out there nearly every day. Right next south of the round barn was another huge barn that was used mostly for the performing horses and the riding stock. Right next to this large barn was the canning factory and the cider works. For several years, the 101 Ranch operated one of the largest commercial gardens in Oklahoma. They also had the largest apple orchard in Oklahoma. 40 to 50,000 bushels of apples a year were produced. They were shipped out by the train carload. All the cubs and the surplus from the gardens was canned in this canning factory or made turn west, we'll come to the oil refinery. This refinery refined oil from the miller's own oil well. And they put in the gasoline and other products to be used not only on the ranch, but sold in the ranch filling station. Right next to the oil refinery was the tannery. It was a large building where rawhide from the packing house was turned into leather. With this, they also had a leather manufacturing plant where they made nearly everything that could be made out of leather was made up there. Right next to the tannery was the packing house. It was a large, modern, up-to-date structure that processed cattle and hogs from the range and was delivered all over northern Oklahoma in refrigerated trucks. And at this location was also located their electrical generating plant. They generated enough electricity for a small town. They also had their own water system. They had their own sewer system. They had their own natural gas system. But when the gas came from their own gas well. And also at this site they had an ice plant that produced 10 tons of ice per day. Right next west of the packing house was the hog department, where they kept the largest herd of registered Duroc Derby hogs in the United States. Some 10 to 12,000 head were on hand at all times. They not only had quantity in the hog business, they had quality. Their hogs won grand championship prizes in all the major livestock shows in the United States. And we turn on, go south of there, we come to another elk farm where they had an elk pasture, a herd of elk. Joining the elk factory was a group of about 12 cabins and a mess hall out in the bend of the Salt Fork River, where young men from the east would come out and spend the summer, probably an early day goose night. From there, we will go back up towards the main building. We will go by the laboratory where the millers made their own hog syrup. Next to that, we come to the dairy barn, where the milk from 500 cows would be processed and sold over the northern part of Oklahoma. Just across the street from the main dairy barn was a large building that was originally built for a sweet potato curing house. And we most know that sweet potatoes have to be cured when they're first dug, or they'll have so much moisture in them that they won't keep. So they had this large curing one. They would raise from 40 to 50,000 bushels of sweet potatoes a year. In fact, their best year, they raised over 300,000 bushels of sweet potatoes. Right next to later years when the ranch went back into the Wild West show business, part of this building was made to house the elephants. They had the finest herd of performing elephants in the United States. We will travel on east for about a block and we'll come to highway. This at that time was Highway 77, the main north-south highway across the United States. We will cross the highway to the rodeo arena, where they had a seating capacity of 25,000 people. If it was on Labor Day, and when the millers always had their annual rodeo, every seat would be occupied. And all the winners of the contests were declared world champions. And if we were lucky, we might even see Bill Pickett demonstrate his art of bulldog. And it was not Labor Day. If in the spring of the year, perhaps we would see the Wild West show performers practicing before they got on the road with their Wild West show. It took 30 railroad cars to haul this show. And some other time of the year, we might find their movie crew. They're getting ready to make another Western movie. The Miller brothers were the first people to make movies in Hollywood, California. For several years, they wintered their show in California so that they could use the performers and the equipment and take advantage of the nice California weather. As we come out of the arena, right next door is the school where all the bridge employees' children went to school. And if we would look to the south, if this was a Labor Day weekend, on a high bluff overlooking the ranch was Cowboy Hill. This was the meeting place of the Cherokee Strip Cowpunchers Association. And in the early days, as many as 800 to 900 people would come and camp there for the weekend. As we come back up towards the ranch of the house, we come to the hotel. It was a large two-story building. And right next across the street from the hotel was the store. They showed a picture of the store here. South half of that store was the general offices for the entire ranch. The north part was the general store where they say that you could buy practically anything you wanted. And also there chained to a tree in front of the store was Tony the Bear. I believe they had a picture of him drinking something coffee. He could sit up and he always wanted to drink it right straight from the bottle. And once you gave him one, they said you had better hand it to him because he would take it away from you if you didn't. Right next door to the cafe, or to the store, was the cafe, where we could go in and get a delicious meal with everything prepared and sprayed right there on the ranch. And as we looked out the window at the cafe, we could see the ostriches pass, where a number of the large ostriches would get. We would stroll back over to the ranch to the White House, and that would complete our tour of the ranch headquarters. And if we were lucky, Colonel Zach might be there. And he was the great storyteller of the ranch. And maybe we could get him to tell us about when he went to Florida and purchased 36,000 head of cattle and shipped them all out of Florida by rail. 800 railroad cars full of cattle. And this was probably the largest shipment by an individual in history. We might get Zach to tell us about when he bought an army that was actually in the field fighting. This was during the Mexican Revolution, when Montebello chased the federal army up to the Rio Grande River. And they had two choices. They could either stay in Mexico and be killed, or they could come across the Rio Grande into the United States. They came across the river. But since the United States was not at war with Mexico, they did not know what to do with all of this equipment. So Zach was there, and he was always ready for an opportunity. He made an offer for all of that equipment, and they accepted it. There were several hundred, as many as 15 to 2,000 head of horses and mules. There was harness and saddles and ammunition. Everything that the Army would have while they were out in the field fighting. In fact, there were so many wagons that he did not try to count them. They just measured the area that they covered, and he sold them by the acre. A number of these horses and mules ended up over in Europe fighting during World War I. Or, Zach was quite a storyteller. Maybe we got him started, he would tell us how during a disastrous flood on the Mississippi River, he went down and rented a steamboat. And he went around and picked up cows and horses and mules that were stranded on them small islands that were going to die if he didn't. And he hauled them to dry land. And after the flood went down, the owners of this property could come and identify that he would pay them for it. Or maybe he could tell us about when George L. Miller and E.W. Marlin started the 101 Ranch Oil Company, which drilled the first oil wells in northern Oklahoma, which was later merged into the Marlin Company, later into Conoco. So you might say that today the 101 Ranch Oil Company was the granddaddy of ConocoPhillips. Or we could have Zach tell us about the time that Bill Pickett tried to bulldog the Fighting Bull in Mexico. The show was in Mexico City, and Joe Miller arranged a bet with one of the owners of a bull ring that Bill Pickett could bulldog one of those fighting bulls, and they put up a $25,000 bet. Well, Bill wasn't with the show at that time. He was back up at the ranch picking cotton. He could make more picking cotton, I guess, than he could with the show. But anyway, they called for him to come to Mexico. They gave him some expense money and put him on a train. The only trouble, the train stopped in Guthrie, Oklahoma. And Bill got off and had to refresh his whistle a little bit, and he forgot about the train. When he didn't show up when he should have in Mexico, they started looking for him, and they still found him in Guthrie. The only trouble, he had lost his ticket, and he had spent all of his money. So they had to put someone with him to get him to Mexico. But anyway, he went out and jumped on the steer and grabbed him by the horns like they do normally. But the only trouble, those fighting bulls were developed to have such a short, strong neck that he could not twist his head to put him down. But the rules of the contest was that he would hang on to that bull for so many minutes. Well, he hung on that long, but no one blew the whistle. He held on for twice that long. At that time, the audience decided he wasn't going to turn loose. So they started throwing bottles at him if he got close enough to the fence. Someone hit him with a real heavy liquor bottle and broke two of his ribs. But by that time, the Miller brothers decided that they were not going to ever come out and get him off. So they rode into the arena and roped the bull and got Bill Pickett out of the arena. And Joe Miller collected his $25,000 bill. And Bill, he got his $8 a week salary from the show, and for a bonus that week they threw in a second-hand soda club. He was so injured that he spent the next year on a ranch in Chandler, Oklahoma, recovering from this ordeal. And let's see. If we have time, I guess maybe we have another minute or two. We could load up in the cars and head south. Of course, we'd stop at the station and fill up with 101 Ranch gasoline before we left. Cross the river and to where we would see the largest privately owned buffalo herd in the United States. We would also see a new breed that they had developed called Calio, with the crosses between cattle and buffalo. We also might go by the pasture where they were experimenting with crossing zebras with horses so they could get some striped horses to pull their show wagon. And we continued a little farther south down towards Marmon. We would go by the White Eagle Monument that you saw here today. And one of the things that our organization is trying to do is, you notice, that is Bill Pickett's grave there, and we are trying to open that area. We own the land where that grave a little bit. But as we went on farther south, at that time Bill was still very much alive, that we could go on south to the edge of Marvin, and there would be the show train sitting there on a siding if it was off season. And I never realized for a long time I heard 30 railroad cars. I never could picture in my mind how many that was. So one day I was sitting waiting for a train to go by and I started counting the cars. And when I counted 30, I realized then it took a lot of people, performers, and equipment to fill up 30 railroad cars. And if we went on into Marvin, they had several huge buildings there in Marvin where they stored the Wild West show. They also had warehouses and different things. And if we still wanted to see a little more, we'd go east over to the Bar Hill ranch, which was a branch of the 101, and watch them train polo ponies. And probably by that time it was getting tired and we would all get back to the White House. And that was a very short history for a tour of the 101. There have been so many stories and so many things happen up there that you can't have it all at once. There have been hundreds of magazine articles written about the land, and there have been several real good books. And if you're interested, I would suggest, and we have our museum in Palm City. If I have whetted your appetite just a little bit this morning, maybe you could get more interested in, I'd like to call our attention to our newsletter over here on the table. But I would like to call your attention to the feature article in that newsletter. In the back, there's several pages, and if you will note the publishing date on that publishing date there, August the 27th, I believe, 1904. And the ranch was quite a place at that time, and it only got larger as the years went by. And now, maybe some of you are asking, what happened to such a place? Well, there's several long stories. Maybe I could sum it up in just a few words. They spent next year's income last year. I thank you all.
Does anybody have any questions? He said he'd be glad to answer any questions anyone might have.
A lot of people might want to know why it was called the 101.
Well, that is another one of the stories. Let me tell you the story. Now, there's three stories about, three different versions about everything about the 101 ranch. There's a true story when it actually happened. And there's the build-up story to make it look good. And there's the bad story to make it look bad. So, to answer your question, there's probably a dozen versions of why it's called the 101 Ranch. I like the version that right after the Civil War, G.W. Miller, a displaced Kentuckian, went to Texas and would drive cattle up the trails to market. And he always put a trail brand on his cattle so that if they got mixed with anyone else's, they would know his cattle. One year he bought a herd of cattle that was branded Bar O Bar. And he thought that was too much, so he just turned the bars up and made 101. So we call that everything. Another version is that down in a little town where his cowboys liked that place so well that he couldn't keep them out of there to do the work. So he told them, he said, well, if you like the 101 so well, I'm going to brand these cattle 101 so you can look at it all the way to Kansas. And there's always been the story that the 101 range contained 101,000 acres. It never had that many acres. It had more than that at one time, but the acreage varied from year to year. There's also another story about one time that it was 101 miles to Wichita, Kansas, and it was 101 miles to Oklahoma City. But the only trouble with that, there wasn't any Oklahoma City when the ranch started. So, like I say, there's a lot of origins to every story. So, anybody else? Sir? Yeah.
I remember when I was called upon from Cowboy Museum here to go for our Western Heritage that year and pick up so many of the Miller brothers, evidently were still left, and bring them here to be honored for their best Western.
Well, you probably picked up the Joe and George Jr.
I guess I did, yes.
They even at that time, they were old gentlemen.
Oh, okay, yes.
They were sons of Joe C. Miller.
Yes, that's right.
And Joe Miller was a very good friend of the 101 Ranch Old Timers Association. He passed away just a couple of years ago.
I was Joe.
In his 90s, he was 93 or 4 years old at the time. He was a very good friend of mine and of the Old Timers Association.
Thank you for
How did Bill Pickett develop his writing technique to Bulldog? How did he what? Develop the writing technique that he had?
Well, the story to that is, you'll notice that most of them were stories. Bill was raised in East Texas, and there was lots of brush down there. In the early days, there was the cowboys that tried to round up these cattle, which were wild as deer, and it would run into this brush, and they couldn't get them out. So they developed bulldogs that could go in under that brush and bring the cattle out. And that is one way they started calling it bulldog. So when Bill, as a young man, started doing his act, after he turned the steer down and got him on the ground, he would reach up and bite the steer on the lip with his own teeth. And he must have hit just the right place because the steer would lay there just as gentle as a lamb. and he was biting. And he did that so long and for so many years that he finally lost all of his teeth, so he had to stop that part of the show.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. There's one other thing that, a few years ago, there was a stamp put out with Bill Pickett's picture on it. The first ones of those that were put out was not Bill Pickett. That was his brother. So they had to recall all of those stamps. And now the one out now does have the real Bill Pickett on it. Thank you.
But this is the introduction. Once upon a time in the far reaches of north central Oklahoma, not far from the Kansas border, was a ranch empire of cattle, bucking horses, oil fields, and grasslands. The ranch, which at its zenith encompassed 110,000 acres in the Ponca Indian country, was the wildest, woolliest, and most unusual operation of its kind in the history of the American West. It became known far and wide as the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch. As a 101 Ranch publication from 1910 boasts, the 101 Ranch of Bliss, Oklahoma, owned by the three Miller brothers, is the wonder spot and showplace of all the great Southwest. Here is ranching in all its old-time picturesqueness. Here are the thousands of cattle and horses, the unblocked trails and the cattle pastures, the unchanged cowboys and the Wild West girls, the roundup camps, the corrals, and many tribes of primitive Indians living undisturbed in wigwam, lodge, or roughhouse. Everything about the place was done on a grand scale. As Glenn Shirley, in the foreword of Ellsworth Collins and Alma Miller England's book, The 101 Ranch, wrote, great reputations have been given to a score of big cattle ranches that once covered the western United States from Mexico to Canada. But the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch of Oklahoma was the most fabulous. It survived longer than most and reached its peak after the other big outfits had disintegrated. None ever duplicated its spectacle. It can never be repeated. Will Rogers spoke of Pickett's passing on national radio, and Zach Miller rallied enough to scribble a rambling, sentimental poem about Pickett and arrange for the funeral to be held on the front gallery of the White House. More than 1,000 people, mostly cowboys, cowgirls, and Indians, gathered to say goodbye to Pickett, about 60 years old, who had been loyal to Zach and the ranch to the very end. After a preacher spoke and read scripture, they buried the old cowboy near the stone monument for White Eagle, south of the ranch headquarters. As his fancy coffin was lowered into the earth, a choir sang, "Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot." Others buried on the windswept hill in the 1930s kept Pickett company. James E. Curbhouse Kirby Smedley, an ox team trainer for the Miller Show. Henry Clay, a black cowboy who had taught Will Rogers some rope tricks. Gladys Hamilton, the 9-year-old daughter of a Miller hired hand. And Jim Gates, a farm laborer who had been shot to death at a dance. Pickett's favorite bulldogging horse, Spradley, was said to have been buried nearby. I sure wish I would have been there that day. Finally, near the end of 1951, Zach moved into the home of his younger daughter, Blevins Miller Gibbs, at Valley Mills, Texas, just west of Waco. After Zach's 6 weeks in a hospital, cancer had chewed up his liver. Everyone but Zach figured it was time for him to die. Just before he breathed his last, a bedridden Zach told Blevins, "Give me a couple of days and I'll be out of here." On January 3rd, 1952, with Blevins and Zach Jr. at his side, Zachary Taylor Miller, 73 years old, closed his eyes and died. He died in Texas, where so many years before his father had swapped hog meat for steers to start the Miller Kingdom. They brought Zach home to Oklahoma, back to the land he loved. Funeral services were held in the old ranch store. About 600 friends and family members came, bundled up in overcoats to ward off the cold. After the preacher's brief eulogy and scripture reading, some of Zach's best pals, Bert Colby, Jack Webb, Robert Littledance, and other genuine cowboys and Indians, took the metal casket to a special place. They did not reduce the old man's body to ashes and shoot the remains toward the west from a cannon, as Zach had directed in his last will and testament. Instead, they honored Zach by burying him close to the banks of the Salt Fork, deep in the earth of Cowboy Hill. 2 years later, 2 more 101 Ranch veterans, Jack Webb, the trick roper and sharpshooter, and Sam Stiegel, a Miller cowboy and foreman, were laid to rest nearby. In 1986, the kinfolk of Otis James Farmer scattered his ashes on the grassy hill, fulfilling the wishes of an old man who had left his home in Missouri at 14 to join up with the Miller gang and work for the 101. As the years passed, hardly any physical trace of the 101 Ranch remained standing. The land was divided up, and eventually almost all traces of the buildings were lost or decomposed. In 1987, a mysterious fire destroyed the historic 101 Ranch store, which for many years had served as the home of Zach Jr. and his mother Marguerite, who took her own life there with a revolver in 1963. The Salt Fork continued its assault, cutting deeper and deeper into the land. But sometimes, if the morning light is just right, or late at night when the moon makes puzzling shadows, those who know what was once there pause along the two-lane road running across the pastures and over the Salt Fork. They let their minds play tricks. In the thistle and clumps of sumac and out in the tall grass, the wind sounds like strong cow ponies on the move. Hundreds of ghosts are difficult to silence. The beating drums, the solemn chants, the crack of pistols, the waves of applause cannot be stilled. None of what happened there can ever be forgotten. When I went to work on this big old book many years ago, I had no idea it was going to take me as many places as it did. But it literally took me all over the world, you know, far out of these grasslands up in north central Oklahoma, where the Millers and their family and so many of their good hands and bad hands headquartered. As you know, I was in literally all over the United States with this story, in South America, Mexico, Great Britain, Western Europe, but still the essence of the story of the Millers obviously gets back to the United States, and it gets back to the part of the country between the rich grasslands of Kentucky, where old G.W. hailed from, out to these tall grass prairies and pastures of now Oklahoma. And in specific, I was really intrigued when I would make my many, many journeys out to the old ranch and the old ranch site there on the Salt Fork River, just outside of Ponca City. And I always enjoyed those trips, and what I tried to do was find as many of the authentic people who really had contributed to this empire of cattle and crops and oil and entertainment, and I was fortunate to find some who were still around, some of the old timers, as we call them, and there are not many left. I mean, they were an endangered species then, and they're certainly even obviously more endangered now. But probably some of my fondest memories were those old times spent out at the site of what was the headquarters, out at the site and those crumbling foundations of the White House and the slab from the old 101 Ranch store and all those outbuildings, and then across the road, the old great Roundup grounds. And then I like to spend time with people reminiscing across the river, across that old steel bridge and up on Cowboy Hill. I thought that was a very special place where Zach and two of his fine riders are buried, and some others have been scattered their ashes up there. And that was a good spot, and I had a lot of good sessions up there with people. And then down the road, of course, toward Old Bliss, toward Marlin, that true company town, and obviously the moments up at the White Eagle Monument, at that memorial. that pile of rocks, that old rock cairn on what some of the old timers called Signal Hill, that was there to memorialize, as it was redone, this old, very, very old Ponca cairn of rocks, the Signal. But it was there really now in its new incarnation back in the late 20s to memorialize Chief White Eagle, who was such a key part of the Ponca tribe and their history, and an associate, sometimes for good and bad, with the Millers and the Miller family, but highly respected by many of the Millers, and particularly Joe Miller, who as a boy was fluent in the Ponca language, and one of the first ones to really break bread, sit down and parlay and work with the Ponca tribe as a stranger in their land, which was even strange to them in many ways, since they didn't hail from that part of the country but came down from up north. But White Eagle was an important force in that tribe, and an important person as far as the Millers were concerned, and it was only fitting that they should straighten those old stones out and then slap that big old whitewashed eagle on top to commemorate him. I know a lot of the times when I was out there, I'd run into a tourista or some traveler from Oklahoma City or Tulsa or even from Ponca City, where a lot of the knowledge of the 101 has unfortunately been lost, and they'd said, "Oh, well, that's where that old Indian chief is buried." And I never like to call people on anything because it's just not worth it. And sometimes I might say, "Well, he's not really buried there. That memorializes him. He's buried elsewhere, White Eagle." But there are some other people up there that are worth knowing about. All of them. Some of them we don't even have names for. Some of them were children. Some were working stiffs for the Millers, but there was a cowboy buried up there too named Bill Pickett, who, in my opinion, was, and in the opinion of the Millers, if truth be known, and it's just too bad old GW didn't get to know him, because he would have probably declared, along with his son Zach, that Bill Pickett was probably pound for pound the best cowboy that ever drew wages from the 101. And that's where Pickett lies forever, in that soil up there, under that prairie pasture sod on that hill. And I know that it's up in the air if that big old grave near him is one of his mounts. I'd like to think it might be Spradley. Maybe it's Crappie. It's probably a horse, though, that belonged to Bill, and that old Bill Pickett rode. And by God, he rode for the 101 for so many years. And he was a faithful hand, a dependent hand. And we're not even sure how old exactly Bill was when he died, but in his 60s, at least at 60 years old, and still as tough and sinewy as ever when he was kicked hard by a renegade maverick horse he was trying to break, and took him 2 weeks to die, but he did die. And I was glad that Zach and the others memorialized him, as they did White Eagle, by putting his remains out there on that hill. And I even now, and I don't get up to that country as often as I would like to anymore. I mean, there's been a lot of water under that Salt Fork River Bridge, and a lot of water under the bridges in my life since then. But when I do get up there, I always make sure I make a beeline out to Old Bliss, to Marlin, and to the ranch site, and to Cowboy Hill, and certainly to pay my respects at that White Eagle monument. there's no question that we think about Bill Pickett as being the inventor of bulldogging, and sure enough he was, and that's all pretty well documented, and it certainly earned him a place forever, as he rightly should be, in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. But you're right, he was much more than that. He was, without question, probably the first black film star, the first real African American to take a part in a motion picture, which is very interesting because the Millers were kind of ahead of their time, whether they knew it or not. In that respect, they were such big proponents of the motion picture industry and helped it in its infancy, both out in Southern California and shooting on location right here in Oklahoma and up on the ranch. And it's well known how many wonderful silver screen, big screen stars got their start. That whole litany of names of Tom Mix and Hood Gibson, Buck Jones, and it goes on and on and on. But Pickett was the first. He was that first African American cowboy. I mean, and he paved the way for so many people. You know, a lot of people from Denzel Washington all across Hollywood today owe Pickett a gratitude for that, and because he wasn't treated like some step and fetch it. He wasn't treated like some burlesque darky. He had his rough times. Believe me, it was tough. I mean, some of the things he had to endure on the entertainment circuit were rough, you know. But here he was. He was an athlete, you know, paving the way for the great Jackie Robertson and others who broke into big time sports, and he did it many years before. And here he was, a working cowboy. He you know, Pickett didn't just ride in those fancy events and bulldogging. He also drew wages. He worked out on the ranch. I mean, he mended fences and doctored cows and cut them and fed them and you know, he walked the walk, and he talked the talk. He was the real thing, and I think, by God, that's what impresses me most about the man. You know, and those Millers, God bless them, they were, let's face it, you know, they were, especially that GW, they were folks of their times. I mean, yeah. GW was an old rebel. I mean, there's no question about it. He was an unforgiving rebel. He was Confederate through and through. I mean, here was a man who grew up in the plantation system and dealt in African slaves. That was his workforce, and many people think, and I even allude to it in my book, which is partially true. What he did was just swap. He lost all of his African slaves, so he went out and just grabbed up a whole bunch of Indians, at least got their land and sort of bamboozled them. There are two sides to every story, and I think the Millers did have some culpability in defrauding the Indians. There's no question about that. Then there's the other side of the coin, and some of the good things they did do for and with the Poncas and other tribes. But I guess that's what, in a way, attracts me and attracts other people to the Millers. These are certainly guys who put their trousers on, their jeans, or their fancy gabardines one leg at a time. I mean, they could be scoundrels. There's not one of them that couldn't have, in fact, one of them did serve some penitentiary time. They could have all ended up in the penitentiary, but they seem to always be doing it for their cause. They were They were bold, they were risk takers. They could be naughty as anyone, but they could also be pretty good fellas. They wore white hats and black hats and sometimes gray ones. And I think that's what attracts people. And I think people want to know. They don't want a bunch of whitewash, or they want to know what really went on. And it's not redoing history or anything else. It's just, by God, telling the truth. And there's nothing like it. You know, in order to preserve history, in order to preserve the whole and nothing but the whole truth about history, it takes more than people such as myself who are blessed with the gift of being able to write and tell a story. I'm just a conduit. What it takes are those people out there who are willing to put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tear equity, that have just a big a passion in their hearts and minds and souls for whatever particular subject it is, as the writer or photographer or artist trying to interpret it. And that's been my observation all along with the 101 Ranch Old Timers Association. I can't applaud them too much, and every time I do applaud them, in my heart, I'm giving them a standing ovation. This is a great group of men and women who have that passion, who have that fire, who have that interest in telling the story, the real story, the authentic story, and preserving, not only for us, but of course for the proverbial future generations, this wonderful, crazy, mixed up, convoluted, sometimes insane story of that Miller dynasty. It's a story that needed to be told, and it needs to be preserved. We've lost a lot of the physical evidence of the 101 Ranch, and that's too bad, but it happened. We don't have that magnificent White House, that store, those Roundup grounds. But what we do have is that sort of commercial archaeology out there that gives us a hint of what that empire must have been like. And, you know, you tend to speak in cliches when you talk about this stuff, but sometimes cliches get to be cliches because there's a big grain of truth in them. But the old standard cliche, those of us who don't learn our past are doomed to repeat it, is so apropos in this case. And the old timers know that. They have a vested interest, and they keep that story alive, both the good parts of it and the bad parts of it. It's black and white and shades of gray. It's just like the ranch was. It's the ranch, it's the place right there where the west of reality and the west of imagination collided and came together. And it made for an incredible fusion. And it's thanks to folks like the old timers who have taken an interest in the White Eagle Monument, in the old remnants of the 101, in the crumbling memories of the 101, that will keep that story alive forever. And again, I applaud them as loud as any audience that ever rooted out there for a bulldogging contest or a barrel race. And I appreciate so much what they've done.
It was something that's so lucky. I think it was supposed to happen.